It was immediately clear to anyone watching in horror as Grenfell Tower burned why the tragedy happened. The cladding surrounding it was so flammable, it reduced the tower to a blackened shell. But what wasn't clear was just how such an obvious danger could have been missed. That question fell to the Grenfell Tower inquiry, and the failures it examined were so comprehensive, it's taken 7 years to provide answers to the families of the 72 people who died.
The simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by those who were responsible for ensuring the safety of the building and its occupants. Not all of them bear the same degree of responsibility for the eventual disaster, but as our reports show, all contributed to it in one way or another, in most cases through incompetence, but in some cases through dishonesty and greed.
Present, as they have been throughout the inquiry, were representatives of survivors and those who never made it out.
The recommendations published today are basic safety principles that should already exist, highlighting how the government's role, duties and obligations have been hollowed out by privatisation. Where voids were created as the government outsourced their duties, Kingspan, Celotex and Arconic filled the gaps with substandard and combustible materials.
It was those three companies whose products literally fuelled the fire, but the blame doesn't stop with them.
The victims' families may find little comfort in the fact that this definitive report into the tragedy doesn't attempt to summarise who was most to blame. But that's because it describes a catalogue of negligence so complete that it's almost unimaginable. But it starts with the successive governments who presided, in the inquiry's words, over decades of failure to properly regulate building safety.
I call the Prime Minister.
This government recognised that failure.
I want to start with an apology on behalf of the British state to each and every one of you, and indeed to all of the families affected by this tragedy. It should never have happened. The country failed to discharge its most fundamental duty, to protect you and your loved ones, the people that we are here to serve. Today is a long-awaited day of truth, but it must now lead to a day of justice. Justice for the victims and the families of Grenfell, but also a moment to reflect on the state of social justice in our country, and a chance for this government of service to turn the page.
But will it? One of the report's primary recommendations is for a new building regulator, and building guidance has already been changed. But experts warn the regulations themselves remain weak.
You can only regulate and you can only enforce the regulations the way the regulations are written. And my question is, do we have sufficient robust mechanisms to make sure that the public is represented when we come up with regulations and the way they're developed and maintained? Just changing documents and wording is just, it can be a very quick fix, but it's not a very robust way to go about it.
Better rules should be harder to exploit. Before Grenfell, that wasn't the case. Cladding manufacturers were, in the report's words, systematically dishonest, made false claims and deliberately concealed the flammability of their products. But complicit, finds the report, were the organisations charged with safety tests like these and certifying the products as safe. Chiefly the former Buildings Research Establishment, BRE, which the inquiry found following privatisation was so reliant on the industry for its revenue, it sacrificed its application of principle to its commercial interest. The BRE says it is still reviewing the report. So too are politicians, their official advisors, the contractors who refurbished the tower, fire inspectors and others singled out for their failures in the 1,700-page report. The cladding manufacturers acknowledged their role in the fire, but say they did not deceive the market and maintain their products met safety requirements. That claim may well be challenged again. With the inquiry complete, the police investigation can resume.
The inquiry and the criminal investigation, we operate in two different legal frameworks, so I can't simply use the inquiry's report as evidence for a criminal investigation or a subsequent criminal prosecution. But the findings are really, really clear. We have one chance to get our investigation right. We will present the best possible case to the Crown Prosecution Service. I recognise it is such an incredibly long time for our investigation, but I think it will still take us another 12 to 18 months before we will present that charging file to the Crown Prosecution Service.
This warehouse contains the police evidence, 320,000 artefacts from the fire and the materials that caused it, an exhibition of the failures described in the report. It urges its 58 recommendations be adopted to prevent another tragedy like Grenfell, but for the families of the 72 killed, it's prosecutions that should come next. Tom Clark, Sky News, at the Grenfell Tower inquiry.